Okay, well, we'll get started. Alright guys, well, thank you to those of you who are still coming to class. If there's an issue I don't know about, somebody should tell me. Alright, so let's see here. Announcements-wise, your last homework is due Monday, I assume? Oh, it's due 2 Mondays from now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I assume because I had people in my office hours yesterday that was due this coming. Alright, good. Well, the people that were in my office hours indicate to me that it's a little harder than the last one, so if you haven't started, you should. Hopefully your projects are all going swimmingly. You know, at any point if you guys have questions or you need to meet individually for help or whatever, you know, you should tell me, because I can't help you. Are there any questions about procedural stuff? No, I think it's pretty easy from here on out. Right, you have one homework and your final project. Pretty soon we'll schedule presentations for your project. Essentially, it'll just be a couple minutes for you guys to share what you did. It's pretty straightforward. Cool? Alrighty. So, right. So now we're going to get started on the kind of last segment of this class. And notice that, in a sense, the way that I've organized this class, we started very narrowly, right, understanding things like curvature that involve one point on one surface. And then we stepped backward and did kind of global geometry of a single object, right, like understanding the Laplacian and eigenfunctions and so on, requires how all the different points on a shape interact. And now we're going to step back even further. You know, like when we did optimal transport, we talked about multiple signals on the same piece of geometry. And finally now, we're going to talk about multiple pieces of geometry. Right? That's roughly the way this class is organized. It's sort of bigger and bigger and bigger pieces of shapes. Right? And so now, for this class, we're going to talk about collections of pieces of shapes and then just collections of objects. Cool? So our first topic here, I think it's actually probably one that's more familiar to a lot of you guys than some of the things that we talked about in this class. And that's this idea of clustering and segmentation. And certainly if you've ever taken a machine learning course, I hope that they've covered some material that's related to what we'll be doing. But our job today is to talk about these kinds of problems with a geometric perspective, right? And to see what understanding of these geometry problems can give us in terms of how we understand how to cluster data and what a cluster means and so on. Cool, so that's our inspiration for the day. Yeah? Right, so typically when you see lectures on this kind of material, for some reason they always call it clustering and segmentation. And something that was always kind of unclear in my head is like, well, what exactly is the difference between these two terms? And if you Google for it, it appears as kind of this funny carryover from like the business world. And so the clearest definition I could find is the one on the screen here. And it still makes no sense at all. All right? I mean, it's got segmenting is the process of putting customers into groups based on similarities, and clustering is the process of finding similarities in customers so that they can be grouped. I haven't the slightest idea what that means. From my perspective, essentially our objective here, I don't really care what term you want to use, is to take a geometric object and divide it into some kind of meaningful pieces. And this shows up all over the place, right? I mean, with computer vision, oftentimes we want to separate the arms and the legs from the body of a human being. In medical imaging, people use segmentation all the time to identify individual body parts or functional parts of some kind of organism, or to, for example, take your brain and divide it into individual folds and so on. The kind of interesting thing is that geometric segmentation continues to be invented and reinvented in different application domains. And really stepping back and having some understanding of roughly what these people do just broadly, I think is quite valuable. Okay, so that's it. Right? And there's so many different places where you see segmentation. So for example, in unsupervised machine learning, right? So in unsupervised learning, your data comes with no information attached to it. Right? So supervised learning would be like, I have 100 photos of cars and 100 photos of oranges, and now I want to come up with a classifier that distinguishes cars from oranges, or whatever. In unsupervised learning, I just give you a giant data set of photos and I want you to find some kind of meaningful division. Right? That's the difference here. In computer-aided design, segmentation comes up in a very different place. So for instance, maybe I take this object here, which apparently is called a fan disk and shows up inside of your car. Fun fact. It's like one of these standard 3D models that shows up all over graphics. Anyway, maybe I want to take this fan disk and divide it into pieces that I can somehow manufacture or construct a very simple, like just planar parts that somehow I know how to deal with using a, what do these people use, like a lathe? Honestly, I don't remember what a lathe is. But these devices for manufacturing, carving stuff out of a block, whatever. In medical imaging, this is quite important, right? I read these studies, I'm trying to find meaningful pieces of your brain, or simply to take an object of your brain and divide it into smaller objects that I can study, because maybe I don't know the function of every piece. And then finally, computer graphics recently, there's been a very interesting line of research, and we had a guest at MIT that spoke about this during the symposium last weekend, or 2 weekends ago? Last week. Oh. And actually he'll be giving another talk here, I think, on next Wednesday. And the applications of segmentation in the graphics world are kind of cool. Like, I have a giant database of 3D chairs, and now I want to model a new chair. And somehow I have so many parts that I feel like I can model my new chair being informed by all the parts that I have inside of my database. Right? And so segmentation is a very basic element of systems like this, because somehow it identifies the basic pieces that I'm going to use to make new Franken objects moving forward. Yeah? So anyway, this is sort of a big sampling of different places where segmentation comes up. And the first question you should ask when you evaluate techniques like this is what do I mean when I say segmentation? Like, there are a lot of different ways to take a piece of geometry and just divide it into pieces, right? I mean, I could do so by, like, everything with x greater than 0 is one segment, and x less than 0 is another. That's a segmentation rule, or you can come up with, like, maybe I want to divide when curvature is high, or maybe I want to divide when I detect a crease, or whatever. And so I should ask you guys, like, if I give you a 3D object, what for you defines a good segmentation? Yeah, like, anybody have an idea? What's a criterion?
Say it needs to be broken up into convex pieces, at least for human. That might make sense.
Convex pieces. Okay. So if you have negative Gaussian curvature, you can't segment, huh? Okay, that's one theory. What are some other criteria for segmentation? Yeah, the reason why everybody's scratching their chin is because there is no good criterion for segmentation, and that segmentation is not a problem in itself, right? This is the kind of thing that shows up at the top of a pipeline, and then you do something with your segmentation, right? And for example, if I'm dividing the brain into meaningful folds, then the important segmentation there is physiological. It has to do with maybe functionality of different parts of your brain. Whereas if I'm dividing teddy bears into arms and legs, then it has to do with my computer graphics system, and there's no reason why those two segmentation algorithms have to be the same, fundamentally, right? And so this is kind of, from my perspective, like one of the big mistakes that we made in geometry literature 10, 15 years ago is that everybody was designing all of these different segmentation algorithms, and it became this little cottage industry of writing segmentation papers, but none of them were saying segmentation for X, they were just surface segmentation, right? And that's somehow fundamentally a mistake. Like, if I take the bunny and I divide it into pieces, and I look at that and I say, great, that's a divided up bunny. That's not an end in itself, right? And I think it's really important as we discuss these different algorithms to keep this in mind, that somehow, it's not enough to just look at a segmentation, like maybe you look at this dragon and you say, well, this is somehow reasonable because it cuts at the folds, or like Eric is suggesting, maybe somehow the convex pieces are identified, which is, incidentally, it's something people have used in the literature. It's perfectly legitimate to propose that. But you should be suspicious if any algorithm just says, I am an effective segmentation algorithm. That's not something you can say. You see that? And so in reality, there are all kinds of different attempts, and for fun, I managed to identify just, 5 of them here, that are all different benchmarks or different quality measures for segmentation. So for instance, here we have one for video segmentation, one for 3D motion, one for 3D meshes, one for brain tumors, whatever. And you can have a benchmark for segmentation, which is a benchmark, and different algorithms will do well for different tasks, right? So our goal here is to identify, essentially from my perspective, a few interesting methods that are kind of sampled from a wide array of potential approaches to this problem, and then really your job as an engineer is to figure out which one makes sense for what you're doing. Yeah, and hopefully I'll communicate that. But somehow, If any of you guys goes home and writes a segmentation paper without an application, I'm going to be very upset. Not okay. Even a secret. Okay, so that said, there are plenty of techniques out there that are pretty general purpose and do apply to many scenarios. And we're going to start with those, right? So as the simplest possible example, and one that's probably familiar to a lot of us in the computer science world, we're going to start by discussing an algorithm called k-means clustering. Right? So the idea here is I have a whole set of data points. I guess in my setup here, I haven't told you, some number. And my job is to divide it into precisely k segments. This should already lead you to one suspicious question, which is like, okay, what is k, right? If I knew that, then I'd be, somehow I'm like 80% of the way to having solved my problem, if I knew the number of segments in my data. But at least for input to k-means, somehow you just assume that like, I have a data set and I suspect that it is divisible into 5 parts, and my job is to find what those 5 parts are. It's not the most natural problem in the world, but it's a starting point. Yeah? Okay. So what does k-means do? What it says is, I'm going to take, say, 100 points that are all in the same cluster, and I'm going to summarize them with a single point, right? Their average. Right? And somehow a good clustering says that all the points in a given cluster are close to the average of that cluster. Yeah? So in other words, one way that I can view this is that I'm going to have k different sets, S sub I, right? So S sub I is the partition of the data here into red, green, and blue sets. And then within each set S sub I, I'm going to have an average mu sub I. And what I want to do is minimize where you say, do you see how the inner sum says, I'm going to sum over every point x in the ith set, the distance to the ith average, right? This is like how well a single cluster does, and then I'm going to sum up over other clusters, right? And so this is an optimization problem, right? I'm optimizing for 2 sets of variables, the way that I've written it here, one of which, as you can probably guess, is the average, is this mu sub I, right? Which is somehow central to all of the x's, the way I've written it, and the other is the partition, the set of s sub i's. Yeah? Those are basic setup. Incidentally, when you talk about k-means clustering, really, at least from my perspective, you should start with this starting point. And you can imagine lots of different algorithms for optimizing this objective. There's one that everybody thinks about when you say the word k-means, but really, you know, this is the relevant problem here, and any means to that end is perfectly okay. Yeah? Anyway, okay, so that aside, how can I do k-means clustering in practice? Well, typically what we do is we alternate between the mu variables and the s variables. Right? So I have this function, which is jointly a function of the assignment, the s sub I, as well as the position of the average points mu. Yeah? And so the basic k-means algorithm is going to say, I'm going to fix all the mu's and optimize for the s's, and then I'm going to fix all the s's and optimize for the mu's and just go back and forth. Yeah? So first of all, let's say that I want to fix all of the s's and optimize for the mu. That's the easier problem. You know? So take a look at our optimization problem. So there's sum over k terms. Now s is fixed, right? And notice that mu sub I only depends on the ith term of the sum, right? So if I want the ith average, I only have to worry about the inner sum over I. So in other words, I never find choppy. One way to view the mu step is to say the ith mu here is equal to the min over all the possible mu's, and then I'm going to sum over the, let's make sure I use the same notation here, x in just that ith set, so I'm going to ignore the outer sum and take the, yeah? And this is an optimization problem, but this thing is easy to minimize. Yeah? In particular, right, if I take the gradient of this function, this sum, with respect to our unknown x, what do I get? So the gradient of the sum of all of this stuff, right? Well, so the gradient passes underneath the sum. I get, and then for the inside, the gradient of this thing with respect to x, which is sort of a calculation we've done in lots of different forms over the course of this class, is this. Yeah? Okay. So what is the sum over s of this value x? Well, first of all, x are rather.
I mean, it's not in it.
Sorry. What was that?
Are you talking about S?
Yeah, so S is a fixed set,
Yeah.
right? So now, what is the sum of x? Well, it is what it is. What is the sum of mu I? Well, mu I has no dependence on x, right? So in other words, this thing is equal to 2 times the sum of x minus mu I times the size of s. You see that? Is it such that I get one of these terms for each x, but it's the same term each time? So in other words, if I rearrange a little bit, I get that mu I is equal to 1 over mod si sum over x in si. Yeah? And there's a reason why I'm going through this calculation kind of carefully, even though it's probably pretty boring to you guys. Just we're gonna generalize it. Yeah? So anyway, one way to view, like typically when you hear people talk about k-means, they say we kind of go back and forth. We average stuff to, we take an average and then we assign stuff to cluster centers, we alternate. The way to think about that average is really, it's just minimizing this function over the mu's instead of the s's. Okay. And the reason to think about that is now it's easy to see that k-means, at least this objective function should converge. Right? Because in every step, this value decreases. Right? I minimize with respect to x, and I minimize with respect to, I keep saying x. I minimize with respect to the mu's, and then with respect to s's and that. Yeah? So every time, the thing ticks down a little bit. Does that necessarily mean that an algorithm converges if the objective decreases in every step? No. Yes, it's far less obvious that this should converge in that sense. It does, but it's less obvious. And it also depends very strongly on your initial guess, which we'll see in a minute. Okay, so anyway, right, so optimizing with respect to the mu's is quite simple. Optimizing with respect to the s's, well, this is like kind of a combinatorial optimization, right? So essentially, what are we doing? Well, one way to think about this is we could swap the order of these two sums. Right? So you're sort of saying, I'm going to sum over all of the data points x, the distance from x to its cluster center. So how would I minimize that? I might as well assign x to its closest cluster center each time, right? And so anyway, that's the alternation that happens in k-means. You assign each x to its closest cluster center, that's this fancy notation in the second line here, and then you replace the cluster center with the average of those data points. Yeah. And I think this is an algorithm we all kind of know and love. There are a lot of different ways to understand what's going on behind this algorithm geometrically, right? And one question is sort of, if I continue to sample points, from my distribution over x, like I get a bigger data set, kind of how do I expect them to get assigned to these different cluster centers? And the picture at the end of the day that you should have in mind is what we call a Voronoi diagram, right? So here our data set, like our set of mu i's in this case would be all these black points, right? And then the colored regions are the set of points that would be assigned to each of those black points. In other words, for example, the points in this yellow region here are closer to that central black point than to any other of the points in the set of mu's. The definition parsed, Kelsey, looks suspicious. So the black point would be like a cluster center mu.
Oh.
And then the yellow region is all of the space that we get assigned to that cluster center.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. And so this picture that I've drawn for you here is a Voronoi diagram. Fun fact, what happens if I take the dual of the Voronoi diagram? Does anybody know on the plane? If I, so in other words, I'm going to connect two of these black points if and only if their corresponding regions share an edge on the Voronoi diagram. Yes.
You get like the Delany triangulation.
You get a triangulation. Yeah. So this is yet another picture of duality. That when you take the dual of the Voronoi diagram, you get triangulation. And a nice one at that. So okay, so if you want to watch k-means in action, luckily there's like a million YouTube videos you can try that all will show you what happens here. Let's see if we can play. This is exactly what you think, right? You initialize some random scattering of your cluster centers, so you have these colored ones too, and then as you iterate, they kind of move toward the average, and then they reassign, and they keep moving, right? So one thing you can notice is the cluster centers, which are the color points here, they're a little hard to see because our projector is terrible. They don't move too far, right? Like you don't have one that like starts in the lower left and ends up in the upper right, typically. And that should indicate to you that we only get a local optimum for this problem, right? In fact, your clustering from k-means really strongly depends on your initial guess. So there's two big issues with k-means. One is that you kind of have to start with a good clustering to end with a good clustering, which is not such a great property to have for a clustering algorithm. And you have to know the number of cluster centers, which is like kind of a strange thing to ask for. Yeah. You can also kind of see the Voronoi diagrams in the data set. Okay.
The
Yes.
number of cluster centers is the number of clusters.
Exactly. But the problem is, this is a chicken and egg problem, right? How do you know the number of clusters? You don't, right? So somehow you're asking the user, you're asking the user to supply a guess of a number that's not super intuitive. Yeah. Okay. But that said, I mean, this algorithm, I think, is one of the most kind of classical, basic techniques that shows up all over the place, and certainly people use k-means in practice. Right? So, for instance, here, you know, maybe I have a photograph and I want to replace it with like some kind of halftone, like very few colors in my photograph. One way I could do that would be to take the entire set of RGB values that I see in an image and just cluster them, right? So maybe, you know, I'm compressing an image and I want no more than 256 colors in my final image, but I get to choose what 256 colors those are, right? So one way to do that would be to run k-means, where k equals 256, on the set of colors that I have in my image. This gives you some approximation of the amount of color that's there. Yeah? So for instance, here we have like, you know, 2 colors, 3 colors, 10 colors on the original photograph, and obviously, the more colors you have, the better approximation. Cool. Right, so how can I use k-means to cluster points on a surface in kind of a meaningful way? It's not 100% obvious, right? Because typically when if I want to cluster points on a human, like segmented into pieces, I don't want to just kind of segment it into parts with equal area, which is roughly what k-means wants to do. I want to cut it at interesting places, right? But thankfully for us, I mean, really what we've done for the last several lectures is develop so many different descriptors of a point, right? That aren't just its position in space, right? So actually, you guys, give me some examples. What are examples of point descriptors on surface? Curvature. That's another one.
Surface normal.
Surface normal. What's another one? One on your homework. Matthew, you look like you're about to say something, but you're also not going to at the same time. You're killing me. The heat kernel signature. That's another one. Because I know that's what you're heading for. Or the Partitioning function. Anything. So essentially, what you can do is use the value of the descriptor rather than just like the location of your point as the thing that you're going to cluster. Right? And then what you get are kind of meaningful pieces. So for instance, here, let's say that I compute the first 5 eigenfunctions, right? So I have like, of the Laplacian, right? Then one thing I could do is say, okay, well, that means for every point x on my surface, I now have a 5-dimensional point that describes that point x that somehow is intrinsic, yeah? And so essentially, all this paper does is very simple, is lift to the Laplace-Beltrami eigenfunctions rather than just using position in space, which is somehow not invariant to assorted motions, right? And then just cluster those values instead. It's very simple thing. Right. Remember, he uses, so in this case, Raif uses the global point signature, but remember, that's just this thing, I think, divided by the square root of the, I'll refer you back to our lecture on the possible term stuff for that. But anyway, all this is to say that essentially, if you want to cluster points on a piece of geometry, the simplest thing to do is to come up with the descriptor for every point and just cluster those instead. Yeah. One question: does that give me pieces on my surface that are necessarily contiguous? No, right? Because, for example, maybe the 2 feet of the armadillo here have probably very similar descriptors in the sense that their geometry is nearly identical, right? And so maybe once you lift into like heat kernel signature space, all of a sudden those 2 feet can become the same, and they get clustered together. And depending on your application, that's either a good thing or bad. That phrase is going to come up a lot today, like depending on your application, X, right? And I can't emphasize that enough, it really matters. This is not like, I don't know, computing curvature or something where there's like kind of clearly some right answers and some wrong answers. Okay, so k-means depends a lot on your initial guess. In other words, your initial clustering of the data. So what you do is you take some estimate of the mu's and then it assigns some, and then it starts iterating. And that initial point turns out to matter quite a bit. In fact, there's a really interesting paper from 2008 that says, okay, well, most people think of that as a bug of k-means, but maybe I can think of it as a feature. You know, in particular, somehow good segmentations are ones that I keep randomly generating different starting points for k-means, and I keep getting the same segment back. It's a good indicator that that's somehow a good stable segment. Yeah. And so this randomized cuts algorithm does exactly that. Essentially what you do is you just start running k-means over and over and over again. And each time you do this, you get a different segmentation of your surface. And then they have just some basic algorithms for sort of saying, okay, well, I'm going to just keep voting for a cluster until I'm pretty confident that these guys should be, you know, like how many times do these 2 points cluster together? And if it's a lot, then I'm going to cluster them together. So somehow a meta algorithm, right? I have some other algorithm that randomly generates segmentations. And now, but in enough of those, I'm just going to take an average. And what they found is that that's much more stable than just averaging in time. So I encourage you to take a look at this paper that collects, oh man, there's not a whole lot of board writing in here today, so maybe we'll do that for now. Hopefully you can kind of see what they're showing in this figure where they have different lines. They draw a little gray line every time a segmentation cuts in a particular place. And you can see that there are some places that agree quite a bit and other ones that really don't. That's the kind of the next idea. Right. So, speaking of your choice of you know the kind of issues that we have with k-means, you know the two of them. One of them is that it's unpredictable. It depends on your initial guess. The other is no k. Right? And an obvious question, both you know a research question and a practical one, is how could I choose that parameter in practice? And I'll point you toward one paper that's very famous in this area. Where essentially they do this in kind of a statistical way. They say, I'm going to run k-means, right, run into convergence, and then compute, you know, the objective value. Remember that was the sum of all the distances to your cluster centers, right? And what they found in general is that objective value as a function of k has a kind of funny property. That it has like a little mean in general, that like, so maybe here's k, and here's the k-means objective, right? So as I optimize, I'm going to get different values for this. Is it increasing or decreasing as a function of k? Just think of something. Decreasing, right? Because I have more degrees of freedom in the problem. Yeah? So roughly it does that. You know, and what they found is that there's like kind of a kind of a clear need that often happens like somewhere. And actually you can prove a little bit of math about that. But at least kind of heuristically, one very common technique for choosing k is you just run k-means with a bunch of different k's. And then see, like once you start, one way to understand this is the amount of benefit you get for adding an additional cluster center. When that kind of stabilizes, then you stop. Yeah. And thankfully, the way that I describe k-means where you're using like an optimization problem as opposed to just alternating between two unrelated steps, gives you a very natural way to evaluate how much benefit you're getting with that additional mean that you're adding. Yeah? Okay. So this is a geometry class, and we have done a little bit of geometry so far. I mean, we're taking averages of things. That involves the geometry of the plane, but nothing too strong or exciting so far. One thing we can do is step back and say, okay, well, from a geometric perspective, what is k-means doing? Really, from my perspective, there's sort of two things that happen, right? One is that you assign every point to the closest cluster center, and the other is that you take an average. Right? And both of those are very generic geometric limits, right? They don't have to involve, like typically when we think of an average, we think of adding up and dividing by n. But notice that that wasn't actually the way that I motivated average, right? It was that it was this minimizer of the sum of squares, right? And that this gave us an average formula, specifically when I decided that the x's and the mu's were in Euclidean space. But for different types of data, like maybe I have a bunch of points on a sphere, and I want to cluster those, one way I could do that would be to say, okay, maybe all I'll do is just take this thing here, this is just a distance, and replace it with some other notion of distance, right? And we talked a lot about like geodesic distances and so on in this class, and this is a great example where essentially by understanding k-means the right way, you can get insight into problems that aren't just the kind of vanilla version that we're used to hearing about. Yeah? In other words, that the geometry of k-means does not have to be Euclidean. So, when I say that, somehow I'm hiding a little bit. In particular, okay, well, if I have a metric space, I have a distance function, one of these two steps is really obvious, right? I can certainly assign stuff to their closest cluster center, right? So give it a bunch of points assigning something to your closest point is just a matter of computing a bunch of distances and taking them in. But then there's a second step, this update, right? This averaging step. And the question is, if I'm in a space, and my space is just, all I know about it is that it's a set of points, S, and it's equipped with a function d, right? So that like d, x, y, maybe satisfies the triangle inequality, it's a distance function, whatever. What does it mean to average? Right? We actually haven't really explored that. Well, thankfully, actually, before I go too crazy here, why don't I ask you guys? So, what does it mean to average points in a metric space? Can you guys come up with a reasonable model? I think the way that we've kind of derived this has gotten me most of the
Find the point that has the minimum square distance to all the other points.
Exactly. So if I have a bunch of points xi here, right, a perfectly reasonable notion of average is going to be like that. Yep. So Danielle was exactly right. She proposed a really great idea. I'm going to talk about this in a second. But Danielle, you tell me, why is this 2 here?
I guess that when you take the gradient, you end up recovering.
Yeah, so that's one of it. So can we think a little geometrically though? Remember from our previous lecture, right? I talked about what happens when I solve, if I have an objective function that looks like
Oh, yeah.
that. And this doesn't actually give me the midpoint, even though it kind of looks like it should, right? But in order to really get the midpoint, I have to have a function that really punishes large distances more than just linear. In other words, if I don't have that square there, this is A, and this is B, then any point along this line actually minimizes that cell. And now one question you might ask is, okay, but this is specific to 2 points, right? What would happen if I have like 10 points on it, rather than subjective without this square? Does anybody know what happens in that case? I'll let you prove it, so no, we're not going to prove it here. Anybody know? If I have 10, so like if I have this objective sum over I, x minus xi, and I is, and this sum is over more than 2 things. This actually has a name. It's called the geometric median problem. And in particular, if these are just scalars, this will give you the median of your data set. Which is good and bad. What it means is that it only cares about 2 data points in your data set at the end of the day. It sorts them all, just puts it halfway between those 2 in the center, which is very robust, but at the same time it ignores 99.9% of the data. So similarly, in 3D, what ends up happening, or like in 2 dimensions on a plane, right, I have a bunch of points, and I solve the median problem, it finds just the 3 points kind of clustered in the center, and then says, okay, any point inside of that triangle is okay, and I don't care what the rest of my data is. So this is a very robust measure, but if we put the square here, it recovers what we really think of as an average. And so typically when we talk about averages, just like Danielle suggests, what we're going to do is solve this optimization problem. And this has a name, it's called the Fichet mean. Sometimes people also call it the Karcher mean. I think people in medical imaging like the name Karcher mean for some reason, but whatever. And essentially we say we're going to define the mean of a set of points xi to be the point P that minimizes this problem. And in fact, I said, well, this generalizes the Euclidean notion of a mean, and we already kind of proved that at the beginning of the class. I should ask a question here, which is this always well defined? Like, I've written it for you in this nice, beautiful, Greek letter later. Is this problem always solvable? No. So what would be the counterexample where, like, I'm not confident what the average of the set of points would be?
Well, if you had like antipoles on a sphere.
Yeah. So here's a data set where the average is totally unclear. I have a sphere, and my data set is 2 points, and they're on the opposite sides of the sphere, and I have to average. Well, in that case, any point on the kind of the halfway divider of the sphere is a reasonable. And there are even some spaces for which the mean maybe doesn't exist, right? So a perfectly legitimate metric space might be, that I just like maybe just cut out this little equator here just to be evil, right? So I have this sphere minus the equator, and I ask for the mean. Well, now this problem just isn't solvable on this space. So you do, this is mostly just a note that you really should convince yourself that you have a mean before you start using this kind of machine. But there are plenty of cases where you can, and even on the sphere, as long as your data is close, like kind of clustered together enough, you can prove that it's okay. Right, so is there anything else I need to mention here? Oh yeah, one kind of fun fact. Is the curvature, the sectional, the Gaussian curvature of the sphere negative, positive, or zero? You guys remember how this goes? Gaussian curvature?
What was
Gaussian.
the question here?
What is it? The Gaussian curvature of the sphere. What is the sign? Is it positive or negative?
Positive.
Positive, right? Remember the Gaussian curvature is a product of the two curvatures. They really all have the same sign, going down. One interesting question that I'll let you go home and think about is you know, with this definition of a mean, if I have an object that has purely negative curvature, so it's kind of saddle-shaped everywhere, can I run into this issue where I have a non-unique mean? The answer is actually no. So if you have a flat or negative curvature object, your mean is actually always well-defined, guaranteed. It's when you have positive curvature like the sphere where you get in trouble. Unfortunately, there are a lot of objects that have positive curvature, like the sphere being one of them, and SO3 being the space of rotations, which is essentially why people in robotics get in a lot of trouble when they're trying to process different configuration spaces. Okay. So there are all kinds of nice examples of different means that you can think of for different types of data, right? So for instance, maybe ignoring this fact, I have lots of different poses of a robot, and I describe the pose using the joint angle of every piece of moving part on my piece of machinery, right? And this gives me some notion of like what the average position is. Right? Or actually, a fun one that was recently proposed that's related to our previous lecture. Remember that we talked in the last lecture a lot about this Wasserstein distance. This comes from optimal transport world. Well, that's a distance, in this case on the space of functions, right? So I can ask for the mean with respect to that distance, and what I get is some kind of geometric mean. So here, when I say geometric mean, I mean geometrically motivated mean, not the product. So here they come up with this data set, which is a bunch of randomly generated pairs of ellipses drawn on the plane. That's the thing at the top. When if you take the mean with respect to R2, so you add them up and divide by n, what you get back is this messy function on the left-hand side, looks like onion rings. On the right-hand side, they took the mean with respect to the Wasserstein distance, the transfusion distance we defined in the last lecture, and you can see a really nice thing happens because it kind of matches them all to each other. Let's say 80 average. Right, so there are all kinds of different extensions of k-means to geometry problems, this being one of them. Another one would be like if I wanted to cluster points on a surface so that all of the points have kind of similar geometric features. Right? So in other words, maybe I have Homer Simpson here, and I notice that his legs are kind of cylindrical and his fingers are, I don't know, maybe spherical because it's Homer Simpson, whatever, the top of his head, the sphere. And so what I'm trying to do is to cluster points together so that they sort of have similar geometric primitives. Right? So there's an algorithm called Lloyd's algorithm, which is basically k-means, where in this case the mean is a geometric primitive, like either a saddle or a sphere or a cylinder. And what I do is I kind of fit the parameters of a sphere, like my k-spheres, that are approximating my surface at different points. And now I assign every point to the closest sphere and I iterate. This is another example where now your mean is some kind of weird geometric object, and the assignment status is the same as right. So one question is, well, like I mentioned to you before, k-means in particular to computing what I call the Frichet mean doesn't always exist, right? I can get in trouble, or it might be non-unique or whatever. And a reasonable question to ask is like, well, in that case, am I just host? Like, do I just k-means is no longer useful? And the answer is yes and no, right? So k-means, as I've described it to you, is super useful. But you could try and ask a different question, which is like, is there a notion of mean that is a little easier to work with, that doesn't require, this optimization problem that Danielle has proposed to us is a great idea, but it requires solving an optimization problem, and for certain spaces that can be expensive. Yeah? For Euclidean spaces, it's just added in different things. That's also. And so, well, before we move on, does anybody have ideas? How can I fix that? means, but the only thing I know how to do is compute distances. I don't know how to compute means. What could I do? Well, one idea would be, okay, so I don't know how to move around in my space a whole lot, but I have a lot of data points, and those are some reasonable sampling of this space. And if I'm doing clustering, then I sort of expect one of my data points to be pretty close to a cluster center, right? So one thing I might do is say, well, what if I add a restriction to our optimization problem? This has to be in my data set. Right? So in other words, rather than optimizing for the mean over my entire space, I'm just going to kind of choose the point which is somehow most central within a cluster. Well, now all I need to do is be able to compute distances, right? What I can do is compute the pair distance between every pair of points, and that's enough for me to do a calculation. It's just combinatorial. Right? And that algorithm has a name. It's called k-medioids. And essentially what it says is, rather than using a cluster center as an average or a Frechet mean, instead I can just kind of choose the most central data points. So I try all the different data points, compute the distance on the other data points, and an average, and choose the one that minimizes that value. That makes sense? And so this is like the most generic version of k-means possible, right? All you need is a distance function. In fact, as input, you could even, like literally, rather than being given a space and a bunch of points on that space, if you're just given a matrix whose entries are the distance between pairs of objects in the space, you don't even care where that matrix came from. It's enough to run inside of that. Yeah? It's a very generic object, and so an example task for which this is well suited would be clustering of a collection of shapes. So here I've got all kinds of different humans, they're men and they're women, some of them are big, some of them are small, some of them are standing, some of them are sitting down, whatever, and I might want to cluster them by different means, by different, different notions of similarity. So a question which harkens, for example, to Kelsey's course project is how similar are two shapes? Right? And in fact, like, can I put a distance metric on the set of shapes is a very useful task, right? Because we kind of want to know how similar are two individuals if they're in different poses. And there's all kinds of different answers to this question, and really this is a big object of study. And it's quite useful. Like if I want to cluster this data set of humans, I don't want to cluster these as like lists of n vertex positions. It's not a very natural geometry for that space, right? Somehow I want some notion of similarity, right? And we've seen a few, right? We could, for example, we could compute. Wait, my arms around with it. It's no longer the You can compute like the average heat kernel descriptor over the whole surface, and cluster based on or something. But there's certain distance metrics that are really well posed to understanding whether two shapes are the same or not, and don't come from just computing a descriptor. And one really common one is something called the Gromov-Hausdorff distance. So remember that I'm going to think of a shape, and this is going to be, it's going to get a little meta here. So first, we were originally thinking of clustering a set of points in a metric space. Now my question is, can we cluster a set of metric spaces? Okay? Like, given a collection of shapes, can I cluster the collection? So there's one very generic measure for similarity which I've given for you here, and it's one that's worth understanding. Right. So the idea here is, let's say that I have two different geometric domains. Right. So here's one, and here's another. And these are just two different spaces. They come with, so this is x, and this is y, and they come with their own distance function, dx and dy. And my question for you is, are these the same space? Right? And that's a really hard question to answer, right? It's even a difficult question to come up with, like, what does sameness mean for metric spaces, right? Because one thing I certainly can't do is, like, take this and put it on top of that. Like, that doesn't necessarily make any sense. So one thing I do have, the only thing I have really, are distance metrics. Yeah? So somehow, if x and y are the same, what I expect is that I can extract a mapping, phi, from x to y, that somehow preserves this distance metric structure. You see that? So in other words, if I have, here's a and here's b, right, and they have some distance, dx, a to b, right? And now, under my map phi, I have phi of a and phi of b, right? And some other distance, dy of phi a. I know I'm writing this really tiny, but hopefully you guys get the idea. Phi b, yeah? Then what do I expect? I expect that if my map phi is good, so there's sort of two things. If phi is good, then what happens? Then if a and b are this distance apart, then I map a to phi of a, a map B to phi B, then phi of A and phi of B should be the same distance apart that A and B were in the space of phi. Does that sentence parse? I know there's a lot of words. So again, a map phi preserves distances. It's an easy way to say it. Yeah? Right. And when are x and y the same as spaces? They're the same if there exists a map phi that preserves distances. Makes sense? Kelsey?
So, like the shape itself of the boundary, does that have to be the same, or is it just inside?
It depends on your definition. So in this particular one, yeah, I'm drawing you a boundary here, but really all that I'm caring about is this distance function d. Okay? And if the distance function is aware of the boundary, then yeah, I'll end up preserving the boundary. It's not. For example, if the distance from here to here is geodesic, that would be different from if it were like cut through the outside. So a little bit of a degree of freedom as an engineer is so what you want. Yeah? Good question. Okay, so we decided two metric spaces are the same if there exists a map phi that preserves distances. In other words, let me write it bigger. dx of a b is equal to dy of phi of a and phi of b. So more generally, we can come up with a notion of distance between metric space x and metric space y. Okay? And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to look at sort of the worst distortion of distance. And if that distortion is 0, we know it's in the same space. And as the amount of distortion increases, we're going to say that these spaces are more and more different. In other words, the distance is larger. Okay? So we can solve an optimization problem. Right. So in particular, let's say that I'm given a map phi, x to y, and I want to know how good is this map phi at preserving the distance structure. Okay? Well, one reasonable measure for this would be to say, okay, I'm going to take the max over all a and b in x, yeah, and say, okay, well, I have the distance from a to b in x, and the distance from phi of a to phi of b in y, right? And if phi is good, then the difference between the distances should be small, right? So if I take the max difference between all the pairs of distances, then I expect this to be a small number, definitely if phi is a good math. Yeah? But remember, I don't care about the quality of phi, I care about the similarity of the space x and the space y. So, what I'm going to say is, well, x and y are similar if there exists some map that preserves distance structure. Okay? So in other words, if I solve this optimization problem for phi, right, this says over all of the best possible maps, I'm going to choose one with a small distortion. And if that distortion itself is large, then somehow x and y are very different spaces. You see that? This value is called the Gromov-Hausdorff distance from x to y. Yeah.
So here, phi has to be bijective, or?
Not necessarily. So the way that you usually take care of that is by symmetrizing. You consider maps from x to y and from y to x. Yeah, that doesn't matter so much. Yeah. So this is saying the best map, the worst distortion of the best map is going to be the Gromov-Hausdorff distance. Yeah. This is truly a distance metric between metric spaces. So this is used for things like, how similar is a set of pieces of geometry? Well, every human or every triangle mesh in my data set may have a different number of points, right? So I can't just subtract them as a data point, but I can try to compute or at least approximate this Gromov-Hausdorff distance here, and this gives me some notion of how to cluster these things together. And in fact, remember this K-medioids algorithm, all it needs is a value of distance. So this is enough for me to cluster my geometric data set. Now, what I haven't told you is how to actually compute this value. Right? Does anybody have any ideas? How could I compute the Gromov-Hausdorff distance? Let's say that x and y are triangular meshes. Yes, all right.
You could naively go through every single feed.
I could go through every single map. So let's say that both of my surfaces have endpoints. Approximately what runtime would that algorithm be? N factorial. So if I have a triangle mesh with 100,000 points, it's probably unwise. Any other ideas? But you shouldn't have any, because that problem is NP-hard. And so unfortunately, while this is a nice distance theoretically, it turns out that it's nearly impossible to compute, at least using current machinery, maybe someday we will. Because of that, essentially there's a whole cottage industry of different approximations to this, but it's very hard to approximate it and simultaneously preserve things like the triangle inequality. It's quite a challenge. Okay. Anyway, this is only one model for clustering. There are all kinds of other ones that are kind of worth calling out very briefly. Right? Another one that shows up a lot in the kind of medical imaging world, where you're kind of like having trees, like, you know, if you have this symptom or that symptom, you go down and try to classify. It's this idea of agglomerative clustering, where I'm going to go, you know, these are all kind of top-down clustering algorithms, so I'm looking at my whole data set at the same time. But I could also like say, well, maybe it's easy for me to find just pairs of things that are similar. Right? So what I'm going to do is find a pair of things that are similar and just group them together. Then find pairs and pairs of things that are similar, group those together, until I end up at one point in the tree. And then you end up with this object called a dendrogram, you know, which is this diagram of how your clustering works. It's very difficult to come up with a globally optimal agglomerative clustering algorithm, right? Because somewhere you're doing something greedy, right? You just keep pairing stuff together. But it is useful for certain cases. So for instance, remember I mentioned that there are a lot of cases when you kind of want to take a surface and just approximate it with like very simple primitives. So for instance here, the approximate surfaces with collections of cylinders. As you can probably tell from the quality of the images in this paper, this is a very old paper, and you know, with some kind of strange, I really like this horse cannon. But that's that. Essentially the way that they do it, you say like, given a collection of points, it's very easy to see how well that collection of points approximates a cylinder. Right? You solve a least squares problem that says, fit the cylinder that's closest to this collection of points, then you just look at the objective value. Right? So to do agglomerative clustering is quite easy, right? What you do is you take like 2 points that were assigned to 2 different cylinders, then you merge together this collection of points, and you compute the new cylinder fit, and if that's a good number, you keep it, right? So you just keep greedily doing that. And then results actually pretty reasonable, right? You get a horse cannon, you get this like kind of marshmallow human, and so on. Yeah. And in fact, there's a whole series of papers that essentially propose more and more complicated primitives and use the same basic algorithm. It's a totally reasonable approach. Yeah. Related to this is this idea of region growing, where essentially what I'm going to do is seed a few clusters at a few different points on a surface, and then slowly kind of add points that are adjacent to those based on how well they fit. Right? Is another reasonable. Essentially, the takeaway you guys should have so far is that any reasonable approach to clustering, somebody has probably thought of, and it's very difficult to say that one thing rather than two. That's kind of fun. Okay. So the typical way to do these kinds of clustering techniques is you really want to just cluster based on some descriptor, and of course there are all kinds of different ones out there, right? So for example, maybe you look at curvature or whatever. There's one kind of tricky thing to deal with is maybe I have a descriptor. For example, Gaussian curvature is a good example of this, where Gaussian curvature, like if you look at this horse on the left-hand side, I probably wouldn't want to cluster points with similar curvature together. Right? That would be kind of like clustering together the creases on the horse. But those points might give me a guide for where I should cut. Right? And we actually haven't developed an algorithm that can make use of numbers like that. Right? So we'll come back to that in a second. Okay. But generally, I mean, there are all kinds of properties. And I've cited for you here this state-of-the-art report where they go through like millions of different papers on surface processing, and there are all kinds of different properties you might ask for your algorithm to preserve, right? Maybe you don't want too many points in any single segment. Maybe you want your segment to have nice geometry, right? Like a nice radius or a nice diameter or whatever. Or maybe you want the boundary to be round or have nice topology, like be a nice connected disk or something, right? And again, once again, none of these is somehow the correct notion of a cluster. You need to go down this table for whatever you're trying to do with your clusters and figure out what's important to you. Yeah. So for instance, I'm actually involved recently in a research effort that goes into these clustering algorithms, and our case, we're looking at gerrymandering data, right? So you look at the different populations in the United States and you're trying to figure out where to place your voting districts, right? And in that case, your clustering criteria is simultaneously super vague and super clear. And if you look at the Supreme Court cases, actually, there's some really interesting language where they're kind of trying to describe geometric quantities, but it's Supreme Court, so they don't quite have the right vocabulary to do that. And so there is an interesting question. For example, in clustering for voting districts, do I care if it's compact? Like, do I care if there's a nice area to perimeter ratio, or do I care that different groups of people are represented, or whatever? And so that's a great example of a problem for which A, coming up with a criterion is quite hard, and B, coming up with an algorithm that can actually optimize that criterion is even harder. Right. It explains a lot of problems we have now. So anyway, so far, more broadly, whether we're talking about congressional district or pieces of a teddy bear, we don't really have any notion of optimality, right? All these algorithms that I'm telling you, whether it's agglomerative clustering where you just kind of group stuff together, or k-means where you estimate means and you kind of refine them, none of these have any guarantee like, I have the best possible clustering of my data. Okay? And they also don't make use of local relationships. Do you see that like, what I'm doing, like when I do k-means, is I want to cluster everything together that has a similar descriptor value, rather than I want to cluster things together because I know this is similar to that, that's similar to that, that's similar to that, and I'm going to put them all together because somehow they all form one big group of things that are similar. Right? I'm going to chain these relationships together. So, unfortunately, actually, I mean, maybe I'll ask you guys. I mean, do you guys think that getting a clustering algorithm, like making somehow extracting the optimum for this k-means objective value that I wrote down for you guys is somehow possible? How many of us vote yes? The problem with k-means is the algorithm and not the objective function. How many of us vote no? How many of us aren't going to vote? Yeah. At least you're not. So the answer is that really, even k-means where your data set is on the plane, so you just have two-dimensional planes, finding the global optimum of that objective function that I wrote down for you guys is yet another NP-hard problem. This is the theme in the clustering world. It's very difficult to have a notion of optimality. So one thing we can do is relax our clustering problem a little bit, and at least be globally optimum for the relaxed problem, which isn't great, but it's at least a notion that like somehow we have the global optimum of something. And so that's going to be the next technique that we talk about. It's something called spectral clustering. Yeah? The idea of spectral clustering is that I'm going to solve a problem. I'm going to define my clustering in terms of a problem I know how to solve globally. So at least I know that my algorithm doesn't depend on the initial guess, even if I can't say that my output is optimal over all possible clustering of the data points. Yeah? So essentially, spectral clustering is going to give us two things. It's going to give us some notion of optimality, rough as it may be, and also we're going to assemble local relationships. So for example, for this data set, we have two different concentric circles. If you do k-means on that, I mean, think about what's going to happen. So you have 2 points that it has to use to assign to your closest cluster center, and it does so with the distances on the plane. So the best you can do is just kind of slice the circle in half, right? But probably a better set of relationships to use is that like this point is close to that point, is close to that point, is close to that point, and somehow chain all these things together into one big circle. And that's going to be our approach. So in particular, one thing I could do is given my whole data set, I could come up with some matrix. I'm going to call it W, which is a similarity matrix. So maybe between every pair of points in my data set, I compute the distance between them, and I say they're similar if the distance is less than 2. Yeah? So I have some notion of similarity. Yeah? Well, one way to understand how well I did with respect to that similarity measure for a given clustering is to develop what we might call a cut score. Yeah? So a cut score, the idea here is, let's say that I have, I'm going to keep drawing these piles of points. I have some data set that kind of naturally clusters into 2 pieces, right? And between every pair of points in my data set, I have some notion of how similar that pair of points is. Then sort of, if I run a clustering algorithm, let's say I just do 2 clusters for now. And maybe I say, okay, well, great, this data set clearly separates like that. And my question is, how well did I do? Well, in a sense, how well I did is really, if I look at the similarity score, right, what do I want along the cut? I want the similarities to be small. Right? So in other words, the numbers that are assigned to these edges, I would like to be big numbers. And so one way to kind of formalize that is to develop a notion of a cut score, right? So the idea here is I'm going to divide my data set into the union of 2 sets A and B, right? And the cut score is going to say, I'm going to take one point in A one point in B, and then sum up the similarity score over all of these pairs, or essentially all these cross edges. Right? Like here's A and here's B. Does that make sense? So let's say that I wanted to solve clustering, and I give you this as my objective function for clustering. What's the alpha? What is the best way to keep all similar points together?
Does it join everything?
Yeah, I can take A to be the entire set, and B to be empty, and then the cut score is 0, right? So somehow, this picture is nice, but I actually have given you a kind of a misleading score. Yeah? So the way that we solve this is we say, well, okay, somehow really the cut score should be relative to something, right? And so in particular, what you might do is compute a notion of volume, right? So somehow the volume of a cut. So let's say that I have a set A, and this has a bunch of data points, right? What I do is sum up all of the similarities in A, so including the similarity between points in A and across to B. And I call it the volume of A. Right? So somehow, if I cut and A is empty, then the volume is 0, and so if I divide by that, I no longer have a good cut sum. And so somehow, if I want A and B to have kind of approximately equal volumes, it's kind of like saying that the distribution over similarities is roughly similar for everybody. So in other words, I can develop what we call a normalized cut score. Right? So I'm going to have 3 important values, right? One of which is the cut score, which is over all of the edges that I cut, right? Over all the divisions between the two sets. I want that the similarity is small. Okay? And again, W is a similarity, not a distance. Right? These are inversely related to each other. And another one is that I want this to be relative to volume. Where here I'm going to think of the volume of set A, for example, to be the sum over all I in A, and then just the sum over all J. So again, this is like all outgoing edges, Wi J. Notice these 2 scores are obviously very closely related. Yes, right.
This still seems empty already.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. We haven't gotten quite. Okay. Yeah. So in this algorithm we call normalized cuts, what we're going to optimize for is not just the cut score, but the cut score relative to the volume, right? In other words, you want to kind of punish very small volume cuts because those are somehow not good. So what do? I just add 1 over this value to our objective function. Yeah? So at the end of the day, I say, okay, well, what is the normalized cut score for A and B? I'm going to say it's the cut score for A and B, and I'm going to multiply it by 1 over the sums of the 2 values. The sum over one of the 2 values, because I would like neither of those 2 numbers to be too small, right? Okay. So what I'd like to do is find a partition of my data set into 2 sets A and B, so that this thing is minimized. So first of all, what is an obvious algorithm for doing this? It's ridiculously slow. Well, I could assign a binary variable to every point in my data set that's 1 if you're in A and 0 if you're in B, and I could try every possible assignment and just compute this number. That's polynomial time, yeah, computing the score is, and just choose the one that minimizes it. How much time does that take? So I have a binary variable per point, say n points. And I have to try every possible assignment of every possible binary variable.
2 to the n.
2 to the n time. So it is solvable, but not in a very efficient way. So our question is, can we do better? And unfortunately the answer actually is we don't know for specifics of this problem that I've written down here. There's a lot of that today. These tend to be intractable. However, specifically for this one, there's a relaxation for this problem that's quite nice. And is, I think, I don't know what state of the art for clustering, but it's certainly a technique that a lot of people use. Yeah? So the idea here is we're going to define a vector. Let's call him x. And for now, we're going to kind of do this circularly. So we're going to say, assume that I know the partition into A and B. I'm going to start defining stuff, and then later I'm going to optimize for A and B. Yeah? So suppose I know the sets A and B. going to define for you this weird vector that I've called x as on the screen. Right? So the ith component of x is going to be 1 over the volume of set A if the ith component, this is like the ith data point is an A. Yeah? And it's going to be minus 1 over v of b if. Cool? Kind of a weird definition. Yeah? So, why would I do this? For one thing, let's say that I wanted to extract the clustering. And for now, we're just going to cluster into 2 sets. Yeah? What if I want to extract the clustering from X? How could I do that? Well, it's actually quite simple, right? All I have to do is the positive elements will be in one cluster, the negative ones will be in another. Yeah? So somehow, if I have X, then I'm done. The question is, how can I get X? Well, what we're going to do is, I'm going to define for you guys a bunch of different matrices. And then we're going to show that we can write our problem in terms of those matrices pretty easily. Yeah? So the first one I'm going to do is to come up with a matrix L so that X transpose times L times X is equal to this sum that I've given you on the right-hand side. Yeah? Okay, so how could I do that? Well, let's start on the right-hand side and work our way leftward. Cool? Okay, so hopefully I'll do this right. I was just doing it in my sketch paper during the meeting before coming here. Okay. So, we're going to start on the right-hand side. So we have the sum over I in A, J in B of Wij, and the volume of A reciprocal, like that. Yeah? Okay, so first of all, the volume of A reciprocal, notice I made this kind of funny choice of X. Yeah? So, and notice in my sum here, I've chosen I to be in A. Yeah? So in other words, this is and similarly, what is the volume of B reciprocal? It's minus Xj squared. Oops, that's you see what I did here? I've chosen X, basically I've chosen X so that this works. Yeah, just by the definition I'm giving you in left hand side. It's kind of a corny, strange thing. Yeah. Okay. So now, I'm going to expand the square. Actually, even before I do that, what happens if I choose I and J and they're both in A? It's going to be 0. You see that? Because remember that anytime I and J are both in A, right, I get the same thing. I get 1 over V of A, and I'm subtracting these two values. Yeah? So in other words, I can just replace that complicated sum with a much simpler one. Now, when you look at this form, does this remind you guys of anything? In particular, I call this matrix L. Yeah? And notice what happened. I have a bunch of differences that I square and I sum up with a bunch of weights. This is just another Dirichlet energy. This is yet another appearance of a Partitioning. You can't get away from that Partitioning. Yeah? Okay. Right. So now let's expand the square here. So this is the same as the sum over Ij of Wij xi squared minus 2 xi xj plus xj squared. Right? And I'm going to assume that our matrix W is symmetric. Right? So in other words, if I think of splitting the sum over these 3 terms, even though there's a j here, this term and that term are the same. You see that? I can just swap I and j. Yeah? So in other words, this is the same as, 2 times the sum over Ij, Wij xi squared, minus 2 Wij xi. Okay. Cool? Yes, Kelsey?
Why did we take out whenever you transition from the I and A and J things, and then you just went to I J?
You mean this step?
Yeah.
What is xi minus xj if I and j are both in A?
Oh, that's just
Yeah. And similarly if they're both in B? I guess it.
Oh,
So in fact, this is just like adding a bunch of zeros to the problem.
okay.
Good question. Okay. Is everybody with me so far? Cool. Right, so what am I going to do? I'm going to say, okay, well, at this point it's useful to define a few things, right? Notice, what do I have here? I have the sum over, what is the weight of, ooh, man, it's a sloppy weight, that's an I. The weight of xi squared is the sum over j of w by j. Right, let's give that a name, let's call him di. Looks awfully close to the volume. Yeah? And we're going to say that D is equal to a diagonal matrix where the elements are these di's. Cool? Alright, so similarly, what I'm going to do is define a second matrix, and I'm going to call him L. And he's going to be 2 times this diagonal matrix minus 2 times W. Yeah? And then what do we notice? What is this? Well, look, so you have 2 times the diagonal matrix where you sum over J minus 2 times this product with W. So at the end of the day, all this stuff is equal to x transpose Lx by construction. Make sense? And similarly, right, let's take a look at the second line here, right? What is the volume of A inverse times the volume of B inverse? Well, one way to see this is it's x transpose times dx, right? And remember that D is a diagonal matrix, so really this is the sum over I of xi squared times di. Right? So I'm just going to do it in reverse. Yeah? And in particular, di times the sum over j of w I j. Okay? And now for my next trick. I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to take this sum over I and I'm going to split it to a sum over A and a sum over B. Right? Remember that I have this partition of my data points into 2 sets A and B? Yeah? So this is the same. Okay. And what is xi when I is in A? Well, remember our definition here. It's VA inverse. Right? Yeah. Right, times the sum from. Yeah, that's what I'll leave it actually. We'll do this in just j of w by j plus the sum of I b of what? Well, okay, so now we have xi and I is in b, so it's v of b, which would be to the negative 2, right? Right, because xi squared times the sum. Cool? You just tell me if I do this wrong, because I did it in scrap papers. This is high probability mistake. Yeah. Okay, so, right. So what's going to be our next trick? Well, we'll notice that this is now just, these are constants. Yeah? So in particular, I can say, okay, this is the volume of A to the minus 2 times the sum over I in A and J of W by J. Yeah? Plus volume in B to the minus 2. Oh, good, it went down. As the sum over I and B J W by J. And what are these inner sums here? This is exactly the definition of the volume of A and B. Right? So at the end of the day, I get good, I got it right. Okay, get better at this. The front of this class, I was doing a mistake. Okay, so in particular, what is x transpose Lx divided by x transpose dx? Like that. Well, now we have a formula for it, right? Well, it's equal to this thing, right, divided by this thing. Yeah. Well, notice that this is 1 over the volume of A plus 1 over the volume of B squared, divided by this thing, not squared. So at the end of the day, I get that this is of WJ, volume of A inverse, plus volume of B inverse, and what is this thing? This is the normalized cut square. Okay? This is God. Okay. Alright, so in other words, why did we go to all this work? Well, I defined for you two matrices L and D so that I can write our optimization problem as what? Well, I want to minimize the normalized cut scoring. Right? So what do I want to minimize? Well, in a sense, I'm still minimizing over our partition AB of the data. We have that. I'm going to keep writing this in our original form. Right? And I want to estimate x transpose Lx divided by x transpose dx, right? Because we decided that's the normalized cut score, such that xi equals whatever it is, v a 1 and v to the negative 1 if I is going to be. In other words, I just wrote a really funny version of exactly the same optimization. Yeah, so nothing has changed so far. It's just that. Cool. All right. So a few things to notice. Well, one more thing to notice for now, which is what is x transpose on d times 1? Remember that I'm using this bold 1 as a vector of all 1s. We use that a few times now. All right. Well, let's continue here. I'm going to erase this because it's the same as what's on the screen. And the same as what's on the right hand side. So, x transpose times d times the vector of all 1s. Well, first of all, what is the d times vector of all 1s? Well, remember that I defined D to be the diagonal matrix of all these di's. So similar to our last class, we have a diagonal matrix times the vector of all 1s that just ends up being that vector along the diagonal. Right? So this is really x transpose D. Right? So in other words, sum over I of xi di. Yeah. And what are we going to do here? Well, one thing we can do is again separate this I into two sets. You see where I'm going with this again? Right? So we're going to get, in fact, okay, so when I is in A, we know that x of I is equal to 1 over, right, times, like that, yeah, minus 1 over VB, yeah. Just by definition of x. And notice this number that I wrote down here is exactly the volume again. Right? So once again, I get this is 1 minus 1. Where is it? Hopefully you guys follow this. Okay. So we have a lot of different relationships here, right? Yes, Pascal.
Sorry, is that D for the B? Is that the I or the B?
Yeah, this is the I. Sorry. So I have terrible handwriting, so it's really cool. Okay. So we did all these gymnastics, and essentially what this allows us to do, so now I can add another constraint to our problem for fun. I just put down my chalk and I lost. So in other words, we notice that just by construction this is true. So if I have, if I add that, I haven't lost anything. Because we already kind of satisfied it anyway. So what the hell? I'll throw it in as a constraint. Yeah? And unfortunately, I mean, I can write this problem any way that I want. It's still NPR, you know. So I've written it in kind of slick notation here, but it's still a hard problem to solve. Yeah? And so what we're going to do at the end of the day, well, you guys tell me, what should I do? How could I approximate it? How could I come up with an upper bound to a problem? Well, in general, let's say that I have an optimization problem, and I want to solve min f of x such that x is in some set S1 and oops, in some other set S2. Yeah? Yeah, that's roughly what we have here. Yeah? What happens if I just do that? I just remove one of these. What happens to the objective value? It decreases, right? Because this problem includes all of the points x for the full problem and a few more, right? So I have the chance of making this function even smaller, right? So here, what is the annoying constraint to deal with? Do you see this? It's really, you know, our problem is an integer problem, right? Like I want to figure out the set A or B. But, and one way to think about that is that I have an optimization problem like that. Yeah. Well, really the hard part is here. Right? This constraint is one that's hard for me to deal with because it's combinatorial. So what do? Well, I just get rid of it. Now I have a lower bound for my problem. Yeah? So this is called the normalized cuts algorithm. We solve this optimization problem after we remove the yucky integer constraint. And this is what I've shown you here. Huh? The question is like, what the heck does this problem correspond to? Yeah? And it turns out it's just an eigenvalue problem, right? So how much time do we have left in class? Do I want to prove that? Oh, we don't have any time left in class. So we're not going to prove that. You guys can check this at home. Or actually, maybe at the beginning of the next lecture, we'll check. This is a good proof to see if you haven't seen it before. But at the end of the day, as long as I drop that last constraint there, now what we'll see in our next lecture is that this is an eigenvalue problem for x out of a matrix that we construct. Like it's going to look like Lx equals lambda dx. Yeah? And so at the end of the day, if I want to solve this problem, what do? Well, it's quite simple. I just use my eigenvalue code, and I can guarantee that I can extract the global optimum to this eigenvalue problem. Right? And so in some sense, I have a notion of optimality, but I cheated. It's a notion of optimality for a new problem. I change the problem, and then I can solve it. But at least I don't have to worry about the dependence on initial guess. There's only one eigenvalue here that I care about. Yeah? And this is called spectral clustering. And so, for example, one data set here, what we've done is the k-nearest neighbor graph. So every point connects to just like 3 of its closest, or I guess here it looks like 3 of its closest neighbors in this data set. And then I do clustering on this graph, where wij is 1 if they share an edge and 0 otherwise. And you can see, I don't know if you can see the red and blue coloring, but it is quite nice. It actually gives you exactly what you're looking for. So at the end of the day, you're going to solve this eigenvalue problem. And just the points that get positive values in x, you'll put in one set, and points that get negative values, you'll put in another. So the one remaining question, then we'll stop for now, is, well, what do you do if n is bigger than 2? It's actually not totally clear how to lift this relaxation. And the answer is it's not totally clear how to lift this relaxation, but it works really well for 2 sets. And thankfully, there are plenty of clustering problems that really care about 2 sets. And then there are all kinds of things that people do, but again, this starts to turn into heuristic stuff again, right? For example, I could divide into 2 sets, and then I could divide each of those 2 sets into 2 sets, and so on, right? This would be what they call recursive bi-partitioning, which is a very technical, fancy name for kind of a stupid algorithm. One thing you could do would say, okay, well, this is an eigenvalue problem, but somehow what we're going to show in our next class, we only care about the smallest eigenvalue. Well, similar to what I told you before, like you find the first 10 eigenvectors of the Laplacian and then you cluster them, you could do the same thing with this matrix. And so essentially I could do this funny thing where I'm going to compute essentially a descriptor using this eigenvalue problem, and then I'm going to cluster that using k-means to get my k clusters. And at least somehow, what I hope is that those k clusters are somehow more clear because I've constructed this problem to make clusters look kind of obvious, right? And what's one last thing, and I'll stop. Kind of an interesting thing to notice. Remember, we even already talked about what the smallest eigenvector of the Laplacian matrix is, right? It's called the Fiedler vector. And remember, the whole point of the Fiedler vector is it divides the domain into 2 halves, right? So for example, in this barbell example, which I ran myself, this is from my code, the 0 isoline is right in the middle, which is quick. So anyway, I suppose we went a little late, so I'm sorry about that. But with that, we'll stop, and in our next lecture, we'll finish with this, and then move on to correspondence problems. They're some of my favorites.